Over the course of almost a decade, I've been working as a truck driver, and throughout my time on the road, I've encountered my fair share of strange and unusual situations. Most of the time, I can attribute them to fatigue-induced hallucinations or an overactive imagination. However, there's one experience that continues to haunt me, an encounter that defies explanation or rationalization. It was a typical night as I cruised along Interstate 70 on my way to Denver. I knew this route like the back of my hand, and the darkness of the night was accompanied only by the soft glow of my dashboard and the occasional passing vehicle. The hum of the engine and the rhythm of the tires on the pavement were almost hypnotic, lulling me into a sense of complacency. Then it happened. Tuned into my favorite late-night talk radio show, the host discussing some paranormal phenomenon, the signal started to waver, fading in and out. Initially dismissing it as interference from the mountainous terrain or a passing truck, the voice on the radio changed. The familiar, smooth tones of the radio host transformed into a raspy, distorted voice that sent shivers down my spine. This voice began making chilling threats, talking about knowing my whereabouts, tracking me down, and describing unspeakable things it would do to me. It spoke in horrifying detail, painting gruesome images that left me feeling to my stomach. Despite my attempts to change the radio station, the voice persisted on every frequency. While I knew it was likely some prankster messing with the radio signal, there was something about that voice that felt too real and menacing to dismiss. Fear gripped me, and I clutched the steering wheel, struggling to focus on the road. My mind raced, attempting to come up with a logical explanation, an intercepted broadcast or an elaborate hoax. As the night wore on, the threats grew more frequent and disturbing. The voice reveled in tormenting me, describing in gruesome detail the horrors it intended to inflict on me and my loved ones. My sanity slipped away, and the fear turned into an overwhelming sense of dread. I pulled off the highway at the next exit, seeking refuge at a truck stop, hoping the voice would cease once I left the road. Parked at the truck stop, I turned off the engine, sitting in the darkness, praying that the nightmare would end. For a while, it seemed to work. The voice disappeared, and the familiar sounds of the radio host returned. I breathed a sigh of relief, feeling the tension slowly leave my body. But just as I started to regain my composure, the voice returned, louder and more sinister than before. It taunted me, mocking my attempts to escape, promising that it would never leave me alone. It seemed to revel in my fear, feeding off my terror like a twisted parasite. Unable to bear the gruesome threats any longer, I cut off the radio, vowing never to hear that voice again. Despite my resolve, the experience left me shaken and paranoid. I kept glancing in my rearview mirror, searching for signs of the mysterious figure that had me. I made it to Denver without further incidents, but the memory of that night still haunts me. I've shared my story with other truckers, and while some dismiss it as a tall tale or a product of an overactive imagination, a few have shared similar experiences. They too speak of mysterious voices on the radio, of threats and taunts that seem to come from nowhere, following them for miles. They talk about feeling watched, hunted by some unseen force that relishes their fear. Whether these stories hold any truth or are simply a result of late-night fatigue and too much caffeine remains uncertain. One thing is certain: I'll never forget that night on Interstate 70. The night a voice on the radio turned my world upside down, leaving me with a fear that refuses to let go. I may never discover who or what was behind that terrifying voice, and that uncertainty serves as a constant reminder that there are things in this world we can't explain, things that defy logic and reason, leaving us with scars that may never fully heal. I devoted a solid decade to working as a trucker, transporting cargo for various companies. About 3 years ago, I was employed by a warehouse company in Kansas, handling shipments on a chilly Monday, February 2nd. Eager to swiftly complete a series of deliveries, I planned to reach the destination on the same night, foregoing the idea of pulling over to sleep on the side of the road. Setting out at 3 p.m., I was determined to get the job done. As the hours passed, weariness set in, and my eyes grew dry, making it a struggle to keep them open. To stay alert, I sipped water and splashed some on my face. The nearly deserted highway allowed me to drive at a brisk pace, a bit over the speed limit for a semi. The miles seemed endless, and exhaustion crept in. Occasionally, a passing vehicle provided relief from the monotony. It's known in our trade that many truckers admit to nearly nodding off while driving. On this particular night, I was dangerously close to that point. To combat fatigue, I continued with my trusty coffee as I gazed at the road ahead, illuminated only by my headlights. Something strange happened in the distance. An odd red light caught my attention. Slamming on the brakes, my truck slowed down, revealing the figure of a person standing in the middle of the road. This individual, clad in all black attire, with an unusually long scarf around their neck, stood there with an oddly elongated neck. Their face appeared completely blurred, impossible to distinguish. Contemplating rolling down my window to inquire if they needed help, the person abruptly turned and sprinted into the nearby woods. Without hesitation, I hit the gas, eager to leave this eerie encounter behind. It wasn't until about 20 seconds later that the strangeness of the situation sank in. My heart raced as I realized how profoundly unsettling that encounter had been. In the interest of time, I brushed it off. Several minutes passed without incident, but fatigue took its toll, causing me to swerve into the opposite lane. With around 40 minutes of driving left, exhaustion overwhelmed me, and I searched for a suitable spot to pull over and rest. Eventually, I found a small gravel rest stop off the side of the road. Parking my semi, I reclined my seat, hoping to catch a brief nap. Drifting off for less than an hour, I was jolted awake by an inexplicable feeling of dread. In the darkness, something urged me to switch on my headlights. Following my instincts, the area in front of my truck was bathed in light, revealing a man standing right in front of the truck, the same man with the black scarf I had encountered earlier. Now, his face was more clearly visible, featuring an unnaturally wide smile and overly wide-open eyes etched in my memory. He gazed straight at me through the windshield. My instincts kicked in, and I started the truck, pulling away from that clearing as fast as I could. I couldn't fathom how he had managed to cover the distance and appear in front of my truck. I didn't make any more stops that night until I reached my destination, parked in the lot, and slept until the early morning. I've tried to rationalize it, attributing the strange events to fatigue-induced hallucinations, but the vividness and sheer terror of those moments continue to haunt me. It remains an unsettling mystery in my mind, something I can't easily forget. For a span of 9 years, I've worked as a semi-truck driver, bearing witness to some truly unbelievable things on the road. They say to expect the unexpected, and I learned that the hard way. One chilly December evening, I had been on the road all day, driving from Seattle, Washington, to Boise, Idaho. It was a familiar route for me, and the miles seemed to pass quickly as my shift neared its end. Exhaustion began creeping in, prompting me to pull into a rest stop near Snake River Canyon, just off the I-84 freeway. I always played it safe at rest stops, parking my rig at the far end of the lot to ensure there were plenty of other vehicles around me as a precaution. After setting the parking brakes, I grabbed my flashlight and headed toward the rest stop's restrooms. As I walked, I noticed a woman standing in the shadows at the edge of the parking lot. She looked disheveled and frantic, clearly in distress. I assumed she might be a homeless person seeking shelter for the night, but as I got closer, she rushed toward me. "Please," she implored, "I need your help. My husband just called, and he's having chest pains. We need to get to the hospital." The fear in her eyes sent a shiver down my spine. I hesitated for a moment, but her desperation was palpable, and I couldn't leave her stranded. Reluctantly, I agreed to help. We climbed into the cab of my truck, and I asked her for more details about her husband's condition. She introduced herself as Claire, and her husband was named Eric. She explained that he was struggling to breathe and experiencing dizziness. According to her, his condition was deteriorating rapidly, and time was of the essence. We drove in silence as I navigated the winding roads heading for the hospital. My mind was racing with questions, but I knew now wasn't the time to ask them. Finally, we arrived at the hospital, and I pulled up to the emergency room drop-off area. Without a word, Claire rushed toward the entrance, and I followed suit. My heart pounded as I scanned the area, but she had disappeared. I frantically searched the lobby and hallways, but there was no sign of her. I asked the receptionist if she had seen Clara, and she led me to a room. In that room, I found Claire slouched against the wall, and Eric was lifeless. After a few moments of somber silence, I mustered the courage to ask Claire what had transpired. Overwhelmed by grief, she struggled to speak. She eventually admitted to a terrible argument they'd had earlier and confessed to slipping something into his drink. I was utterly shocked, and my mouth hung open as I tried to process the gravity of her revelation. The rest of the drive back to the rest stop was enveloped in heavy silence, only punctuated by the steady hum of the engine. Upon our return to the rest stop, Claire got out of the truck and slowly walked away, disappearing into the night. After regaining my composure and taking a few deep breaths, I called the police. That night, I learned a harsh lesson. No matter how experienced you are in life, you can never predict what the future may hold. Thank you. Thank you.